Hi, this is Dr. Gregory Sadler. I'm a professor of philosophy and the president and founder of an educational consulting company called Reason.io, where we put philosophy into practice. I've studied and taught philosophy for over 20 years, and I find that many people run into difficulties reading classic philosophical texts. Sometimes it's the way things are said or how the text is structured. But the concepts themselves are not always that complicated, and that's where I come in. To help students and lifelong learners, I've been producing longer lecture videos and posting them to YouTube. Many viewers say they find them useful. What you're currently watching is part of a new series of shorter videos, each of them focused on one core concept from an important philosophical text. I hope you find it useful as well. In Chapter 5 of the Categories, when Aristotle is discussing substance, or ousia in Greek, which is one of the most important of the categories, there's a preliminary discussion about substances and what we call contraries, enantiai. This is an important linguistic and metaphysical term for Aristotle's understanding of things and how they're related to each other. So Aristotle is trying to work with this notion of opposition or contrariness to each other. And you notice some of the examples of things that are contrary: white, black, diseased, healthy, warm, cold, bad, good. He also included sweet and bitter, which is something that plays an important role in his discussions of flavors and tastes and things like that. Now, this is an issue that had puzzled the Greek philosophers quite a bit. How could these opposites or these contraries be related to each other? Was it in terms of substances or things themselves? Was it in terms of something else? So Aristotle is working with this and providing us with an explanation here. So there's three main things that he says in this account that are particularly important. The third one is the most important. But let's go through all of them. So the first thing that he says is substances themselves do not have contraries or opposites. Now, this is an interesting thing to say, because if we think about, how we represent things to ourselves, we say so-and-so is the opposite of this person. But what we mean there is going to turn out that they have some opposite qualities, or even that there's some other thing going on there. It's not as substances themselves, whether as primary, that is individual substances, or as secondary, that is species or genuses, these classes that things are associated with each other. It's not as substances per se that they're opposed to each other. It's rather substances understood as being in a relation to each other, substances with a certain quality to each other. So substances as substances do not have contraries. Aristotle says, look, it doesn't make any sense to talk about something being the contrary of a human being. How could first substances have them? This man, for example, that animal. Nothing is contrary to them. Now, we do have interesting schemes where we might say, well, dogs are the opposite of cats, right? So we're talking about two different species there. But they're not really the opposites. That's something that we're adding to it. There's nothing in the scheme of things that makes dogs and cats opposites to each other, in the way that, say, black and white or cold and warm are opposed to each other. Aristotle also says that substances do not admit of degrees, or more literally, a greater and a lesser. So what does he mean by that? He means that insofar as we're considering human being, I am a human being. I am not more human being than, say, you are or any other human being. We're all equally human being. We're it. This is what it means to be a human being. Now, the qualities of things do admit of a greater and a lesser. So we can say, for example, one dog is meaner than another dog, and one dog is sweeter than another dog, right? or this person is smarter and this person is dumber, or this person, we got to be a little bit careful with relative terms like greater and lesser, like taller and shorter, but those work as well. It's not just qualities or quantities. We can also talk in terms of relation. And the qualities, the fact that the qualities admit of a more and a less, might fool us into thinking, Aristotle thinks, that substances themselves have a more or a less, but they don't. Instead, what happens is a substance admits more or less of that quality. So if we talk about a person being a better person than somebody else, that person has more goodness as the quality, and they could lose that goodness and become worse, right? Or they could get more of it and become better. Later on, Aristotle will use an example of justice. We can say that this person is more just than that person. Justice per se doesn't admit of a greater or lesser. Justice simply is what it is. But the person being just, predicating just of them, because that's a quality that they have, that can be greater or lesser. What else? Substances, he says, remain in unity and the same, but they accept, and the Greek term for that is, it's actually dektikon on, that is, they are accepting, they are taking in, they accept contraries. Now, what does that mean? Well, if we use this sort of schema here, the substance itself has certain qualities. It also has being a substance of that sort. So, for example, if we use Aristotle's definition of human being or account of human being, rational animal, assuming that we're an adult, right? Rationality takes a while to develop. There's a whole story there. That's part of my substance. Those are what it is to be a human being. Animal, rational. There's a lot of things that go along with that. But then there's also other qualities. And so a substance, can have coloration, white, black. Those are contraries to each other. Given what we know about color these days, we can say that certain colors are also falling into the scheme of contraries. So, we might be able to say blue and orange, or yellow and purple, or red and green are likewise opposed to each other the way that white and black are. White and black is the example that Aristotle uses himself. And notice that not every thing can admit these qualities that are opposed to each other. A given whiteness or of color cannot become black and remain whiteness. Any given color is what it is. The existing coloration in something, like for example this book, right? So this book is green, and you notice it's kind of a drabbish green that has a bit of gray, I suppose, in it, or maybe some brown. I don't know how I'm not an artist, right? Or a person who knows a lot about color, unfortunately. We could change the coloration of this book. Perhaps we, put lemon juice on it or something like that. Maybe that changes it, or we dip it in tannin and it becomes browner. We're changing the coloration then. It's not the original coloration that is, receiving a new quality. It's rather the substance of this cloth that is receiving the quality and is changing. So the qualities, the contrary qualities, can come and go. The substance remains the same and admits of one or the other. This process of accepting a contrary quality and thereby losing the other quality is what we call change, Aristotle says. So, he says we have, changes within the quality, or changes within the substance itself. Substance admits of contraries by having received or accepted them into itself. So something can go from being white to being black, can go from being healthy to being diseased, right? Go from being warm to being cold. Happens to my coffee all the time. Go from being good to being bad, or vice versa, go from being sweet to being bitter. The substance itself is the thing that is changing. The qualities themselves are not changing. They are, you might say, coming and going out of existence in that thing, in that substance. This is something that Aristotle says is really unique about substances. He says, what is most characteristic or specific to, idion, of substances appears to be this: though it remains notwithstanding numerically one and the same, it is capable of being the recipient of contrary qualities. Of things that are other than substance, we could hardly come up with an example that has this characteristic. And he uses some examples. A particular color, numerically one and the same, can in no way be both black and white. An action, if one and the same, can in no way be both good and bad. Now, of course, this has to be qualified a bit. It can't be both good and bad in the same way at the same time. It could be good in one respect and bad in another respect. So we could say, well, it admits these opposite qualities. But we're being, we're qualifying it in that case. We're saying, in this way, it admits this quality. In this way, it admits this quality. But if we consider it as a whole, it's not admitting two different qualities. But we, as substances and other substances, do, in fact, do that. So this is a very important feature of substances. Like Aristotle says, it's really characteristic of substances as opposed to other things, that they admit of opposite or contrary qualities in ways that other things don't.